Anyway, this is Josh Carro, and he's here to blow our minds, so please give him
I don't know. When I was thinking about actually giving this talk, I was going to talk about modular music, and then I was like, well, what's the most important thing that I can tell them? And really that's it, is trying to figure out how to find what's most important to you, right? The way that I kind of define authenticity is an alignment between an artist's inner self and their creative output. When you're out there in the field trying to get a job or whatever, you'll see this a lot, and I learned this a lot in LA because I played with a lot of famous people. All those people, once I got to know them, I realized that these people weren't trying to be anything but themselves, right? But when you're out there in the field, especially in we talk about the film composition field, and especially in LA, you will see oceans and oceans of composers trying to be like this composer or like that famous composer or whatever it may be, right? Because they think that, well, that's how you be a composer. And I'm just using that as an example. But what happens is you get stuck in this thing, and you get stuck in this sort of illusion of this is how I am going to, if you're living in LA, become famous or get a job, right? I need to be like Hans Zimmer, right? And so, now look, nothing against Hans Zimmer. If somebody wants Hans Zimmer, they're gonna ask Hans Zimmer, right? And that's I know that sounds so simple and dumb, but you will go out there and you will see 1,000 people trying to be something that they're not, right? And there's actually a good side to that. The thing that's really great about that is that when you're first learning anything, you are trying to, what would you say, imitate in order to learn, right? Because that's what you have. You have a mentor or a teacher or an artist that you look up to. You're like, man, that is really great. I want to try to make something like that. And so whether you're a painter, a musician, whatever, you try to make that thing or that track. And through that, say you're a painter, you start learning color theory because you're like, oh, how do I make that color? And so by imitation, you start learning, right? You start learning. And there's also something to be careful about, because when you go to school, you're learning a philosophy or a way to do something. It doesn't mean that it's the way, right, to do the thing. But to be an artist, that is a very personal path. And you're the only person that can really ultimately figure that out. You get what I'm saying there? So that's why authenticity is the most important thing. And when you look at these people who are very famous, they are authentic in their own way. You know? How do you figure that out, right? Like, how do you figure out what's authentic to you or what makes you authentic? You know? So a way to do it is to reflect. Now, when you reflect, you're inside yourself, and you're thinking. You can think about whatever you want, no matter what. There is nothing telling you what you can or can't do. Now, when you're thinking about art, you make these things, right? But when you're putting it out into the world, sometimes you have in your mind fear, or maybe I shouldn't do this, or people are going to make fun of me for this because what I'm doing is really silly. And I'll give you examples of that in a little bit, because you'll actually find that when you start feeling that way or thinking that way, those are where the ideas are. Those are where your ideas are, your true ideas. And through those things, you learn not just so much about yourself, but you start to learn new techniques because you're starting to do things that haven't been done before, right? Not accepting things because it doesn't fit into a certain ideal, right? Everyone thinks that a singer-songwriter needs to be this dirty, like, poor, tired thing, whatever. But singer-songwriters are successful because they're singing about their personal experience and putting that out there in the most pure form from what they come up with in their heads. Going through that process, you have to learn from very diverse influences. There's a lot of things out there, And I hear people say this all the time, and I don't know, I usually don't say anything because I don't like to tell people what to do, although I'm doing it right now. How many times have you heard someone say in a class, when am I ever going to need to know algebra? When am I ever going to need to learn, why do I need these skills? This is not going to help me do A, B, C. That's absolutely not true. When you start feeling that, because everyone in this room has felt that, myself included, right? That is when you need to tell yourself, there's something here. You know, I need to learn this, right? And I don't care what anybody says. Learning how to be a long-distance runner will make you a better musician. Learning about literature will make you a better musician. Learning about science will make you a better athlete. Learning about anything will always influence your art, no matter what it is. And you may not think it at first, but you will see throughout the process that eventually it finds its way in there. You know, and you're a so-called better artist because of it. That being said, and this is the last thing I'm going to say about authenticity, because I know this is annoying, but that sort of thing also requires courage. And as an artist, you have to be courageous. You can't just do what you're comfortable with. So if you feel like you need to do something, even though people are telling you not to, you know, think about it. But I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't do it. But those are ways to diversify your authenticity and to find things that you never would have discovered before. Part of me finding my so-called authenticity, when I was going to ASU, I was learning all this really, really difficult repertoire. I was stressed out all the time. Not that you shouldn't be stressed out when you're going to school, because you're expanding your knowledge and it's stressful, right? And most of my time was spent learning notes. I had been beaten down so much through that the end of that time for me, I was like, you know what? I just want to write pieces where people don't have to worry about learning notes. I want to write pieces that fit on one page, where they can get it the first time, and they don't even have to worry about any of that, you know? And I was telling this to some of my friends and artists, and a lot of them were like, oh, that's a great idea. Of course, this sort of thing has been done before. We'll get there. But when I told this to, say, other people, they would be like, that doesn't really make sense. You know, that doesn't sound like, I don't think that you can really put a musical piece in one page and whatnot, and, you know, just kind of like, you shouldn't do that. It's not a good idea, blah, blah, blah. So that's part of being courageous, too, is saying, like, well, people are telling me not to do this, but I should do this, right? This is an example, actually, of one of those pieces. This is a percussion piece that I wrote at Cal Arts when I was doing my master's there. I wanted to figure out a way to write a piece that fits on one page for percussion, right? And so I came up with this idea of like, okay, well, I'll let the performer choose their setup, I'll let them choose the instruments, I'll even sort of let them choose the duration, and I'm just going to use shapes for how many notes are to be repeated. So a circle really is 1, so that's 1 note to be repeated. Double circle is 2, triangle is 3, right? And if you look at these here, 3-note group repeated on only 3 instruments. So if you have 3 instruments, it'd be like da 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 da. If you have 4, da 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 da, right? And they get to choose how many times it's repeated or not. Any dynamics they want at any time, and the duration is 15 minutes. And they can also choose their mallets. So they could start with brushes or mallets or hard sticks and whatnot. Something very simple. And that's it. And I was like, no one's going to play this, you know. But sure enough, you know, someone played it. So this is just like the way it looks. So you can go from here to here, anywhere you want, right? Also, in designing scores, I'm really interested in some sort of artistic part of it to make it sort of look like art. And so that's kind of why it looks like maybe something you could hang on your wall. But the cool thing about this is that when I was working in LA, I was working with a lot of ensembles, And these ensembles, when they get a piece from a composer, is 20 or 25 or 30 pages long, and it's filled with notes, all kinds of rhythms that they have to learn in small amount of time, right? Doesn't mean they don't want to do it, but they're not usually always excited. And when they're doing it all the time, you're just kind of in a pissed off mood, right? So I started writing my pieces like this, and before you know it, I was having pieces played all the time. People were wanting to play my music all the time, and I was starting to make a living out of it. Not just like people paying me to play, to write them pieces, but I was receiving royalties because they were being performed in Europe and like all over the place, right? And this was something that someone told me not to do, you know? So I started having these ideas, right, for pieces like this. And how many different ways can you write a score that fits on one page, right? You can do it any way you want. You can do it through text. You can literally tell people what to do or what to play. And so that's kind of where this modular sense comes in, because these pieces can be played in many different ways. They don't have to be played the same exact way. And they're also not linear, right? They're never the same linear. They always are changing, right? Because of the time is dependent on the player. So this was for a call for scores, okay? And believe it or not, they wanted their pieces to fit on one page. And they're called the postcard series. So there's a composer named James Tenney who wrote these pieces. He invented these pieces called the postcard pieces, where he wrote pieces for his friends and then mailed them to them. And then they performed them. They became very famous. But this is an example of that. So with respect to James Tenney and his swell pieces, so each measure, you choose a new pitch or a sound to repeat. You play the longest duration you can in one breath, bow or stroke, and you make sure to repeat the chosen pitch or sound for each measure number. So the first time, you choose a note and you play it once, as long as you can. Then the next time, you choose a new one, you play it 3 times. Next time, 5 times, new one. 7, 11. And if you want, you can go backwards, right? This is a really fun one to do with any ensemble, right? When you do things just because you want to do them, they go further than you ever realize. It's really important for you to do your ideas, right? Not just because you think it'll benefit you in a certain way, right? That brings me to the next point. The hardest thing to do as an artist, I'm curious what anybody thinks. Like, what do you think the hardest thing to do is? Anybody?
I think well, from what I hear from a lot of my friends who are artists and myself that I've also experienced is just having an idea and getting, like you said, getting the courage to really follow it through and even not even follow it through, but just start it.
Yeah. Because
of that fear of judgment from yourself, from other people.
Sure.
I think really committing is one of the hardest things to do.
100%. I always bring this to a quote that Andy Warhol said. He said that the hardest thing for an artist to do is their ideas. It's just simple, right? But if you know anything about Andy Warhol was extremely prolific. He was doing tons and tons of things. So yeah, it makes sense for him to say, the hardest thing for me to do is all my ideas, because he had ideas happening all the time. And he realized, I have to keep up with this, right? And look at what kind of success he created. Not that it's just about success, but it's about, prolific artistry, really. I mean, he created a whole movement that people thought were ridiculous until they saw what it was about. Creative versus thought trap, right? There's this trap sometimes. This happens to me quite often. I don't know if it happens. I'm sure it happens to everybody. But you get into this thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to do this project. And you start thinking about how you're going to execute this project, right? There's this balance that you have to strike where you are balancing your technical abilities with your creative abilities. And sometimes we can fall into this trap. Now, there was this other project where someone who I really respect is actually one of my teachers and still is my bandmate now. His name is Ulrich Krieger. You should check out his work. He's a badass. He commissioned me to write him a piece for his ensemble And that was one of those things where I felt so intimidated that I thought for 6 months, like, I didn't write anything for 6 months because I got stuck in the trap, right? So 6 months of thinking, right? And I'm like, I really want to write a piece about time because I do study, I study also philosophy and psychology, and time is a very interesting subject because it has all different kinds of, I don't want to call them interpretations, but just interpretations of what it actually is. It took me 6 months to write one note. And that's what I wrote. But I was like, what if it's the loudest possible note to where it actually distorts airwaves? So I figured out what that was. That's 195 dB. But yeah, it depends on where you are, like in the atmosphere. So it's not like that everywhere. Like if you did that in space, it wouldn't do what it does here, right? And then I figured out the shortest possible duration, which this is actually a Planck scale. Those of you that are technical people, that's like that's what Planck is. That's the smallest possible unit we know to measure things. So there was some thought behind it, but ultimately I spent 6 fucking months to write one thing, one little note. You know, I thought that was a failure, but I submitted this and it ended up being played a bunch of times because it's not like it's hard to learn. This piece was played like so many times, and someone flew me to New York, like paid for me to go to New York to like watch an orchestra play this one note. And I thought that was so like, it was so beautiful in its own poetic way. And the audience loved it. Let's see, is this it? Oh yeah, this is the premiere.
No way.
The name of Ulrich's group was called Sonic Boom. And so that inspired the piece. I was like, how loud does it need to be to actually make a sonic boom happen? And I was like, well, it's not necessarily how loud it is, it's how fast, you know, something's traveling to actually break the sound barrier, right?
Are they like shouting at the same time?
Yeah, they decided to do that. I thought it was kind of cool. I don't have it in the score, but the instrumentation is modular or open, meaning it can be anyone. So this piece is actually played by a soloist at one point. It was played by a rock band, it was played by a metal band, like, you know, anyone could play it. And so that's also kind of the beauty of it, is that musicians they're excited to play this sort of stuff because it doesn't require them to be slaves to the music in a way. Like, and I experienced a lot of that when I was in school because I was like, man, I'm just learning all these notes, and it doesn't mean I'm not learning a lot of stuff, but I was just beaten down so much that I was like, man, I don't want to stress about music anymore. I just want to enjoy it, you know? And so I started writing these scores, and it doesn't mean I don't write very stressful scores sometimes. You can write, you know, 3-hour score in a year, or you can spend 6 months coming to the point where like, okay, I just need to write one note, you know? So the path is like very modular in its own thing. And, but at the end of the day, it's very important to embrace your, and it's so hokey, but your authenticity or whatever that may be. And that will actually lead you to where you want to go, right? Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. It was my first big video game score. The OST, I think it was 40 tracks. It's a double vinyl, but the in-game music is way more than that. So what I wanted to talk about is how there's a difference between modular and linear, right? So when you're watching a film, that is a linear experience. It's always going to be the same, right? When you're playing a game, that is a modular experience because, has anybody played Ghost of Tsushima? Anybody played that game? Yeah. What if you just want to stand in one spot for 10 hours, right? So what happens in the audio? The audio actually does something. It knows if you're standing there for a certain amount of time. It creates a new thing. What if you go and you get into some combat? Triggers a whole new thing. So now we're talking about a music system, right? My score is not up there anymore, but you know, this is a small music system. You see where I'm going with that? Yeah? So, okay. That score was insanely involved, right? I mean, it was also generative too. So, if you're going into combat, depending on your intensity of combat, the number of enemies, the music will be different, right? And I did it with like density of stems. So say when it gets really, really crazy, this was actually a mistake I made, was the more crazy it gets, the more stems are going to be in there, right? Because it's going to be denser. But what I didn't realize was like, okay, well, the more crazy it gets, the more gun sounds, the more VO is going to be happening, and it's just the mix is going to be a mess, which it kind of was, right? So those are the sorts of things you have to think about when you're writing linear stuff, like a piece like this. Obviously, this is very free. I don't have to worry about anything bad happening except for like feedback from the delay pedal, you know, and you know what I'm saying? But in a bigger system, like a game system, these are the sorts of things you have to think about, okay? Now, when I have a history of writing many pieces in this style, right? Little did I know, it was training me to think in that sort of modular way, where you're now thinking of how things actually work together in every single different combination. And now, it's not possible to know every different combination, especially when you're getting into like really big systems. How do you keep this together? How do you move from this one to this one? What does that sound like? Does it work? Oh, I don't know. What are the keys? Or what are the BPM, you know, beats per minute? All these sorts of things, right? How can you design something like that? Oh, well, how about this? We'll make the key of this, well, let's call it open fifths. We'll have this be 1 in tonic. We'll have this be 5. And we'll have this be 9. So no matter what happens, if this is in C, that'll be a C, that'll be a G, that'll be a D. If you move from D minor to C major, it's going to work. If you move from D minor to G major, it's going to work. If you move from G to D, it's all going to work, right? That's a very simple idea. But these are sorts of things you can start thinking about that make this system work, right? And so these are kind of like shortcuts to make the thing work without even thinking, how am I going to make every single one of these things work, right? And this is kind of what this sort of thing taught me here, right? You can read this if you want, but these are kind of the takeaway. Like, stay curious and open to learning from different disciplines. Like I said, I study a lot of psychology, and that is actually something that has helped me incredibly, because when you're working with live musicians, when you're working with people who are going to play your music, you know, you don't want to, you know, excuse my language, but you don't want to go up there and be a dick. You know, they're not going to want to work with you. They're not going to take you seriously, and not that they should take anything seriously. Like, you know, you have to know how to talk to people, and not in a way that's manipulative, but you have to know how to talk to people and communicate in an effective manner. And that's not necessarily in a stern way, you know? And studying things like psychology and literature has really helped me do that sort of thing. And also probably one of the things that made me write pieces like this. Have the courage to change your mind. Who you may think you are now, you won't be in 5 years or 10 years the same that you weren't who you are now 5 years ago, you know? Those are very important things to think. Because, yeah, well, I won't say this because I'm on tape. You eventually meet people in throughout your career where you see you're stuck, and it can be very, I don't want to say dangerous. It's not dangerous, but it can be extremely toxic. We put it that way, because when someone that is, say, your client or someone in power is somebody of that sort of personality, it's very difficult to, how would you say, it's very difficult to navigate that sort of thing, right? Because being reasonable and nice or rational doesn't always work with that sort of personality, if that makes sense, right? And it's important for you to know that that can happen to the best of us. And we'll go through it, and I'm sure all of you have already been through that. But I know for myself that I had been there and got to a point where I realized, like, this is not who I'm not learning anymore, right? When you start feeling like that, which brings me to the last point, which is when you start having any sort of resentment or envy. Now, this is where the psychology part comes in. When you start having any sort of resentment or envy towards, say, your friend or anyone who's doing really well, that is a sign that you've stopped learning. Or that's your thing. That's not them, right? That's not their problem. That's your problem. And I can say that from experience, and I'm sure that everyone has experienced that at a certain point. You should. It's natural. It's the way we are, right? It's how we learn. It's how we learn to get better at ourselves or find whatever it may be, right? Network and nurture relationships with teachers and mentors. Those pieces that I was showing you came from people that were my teachers originally, and now we're great, not just colleagues, but like I'll know them for the rest of my life. Like I was just telling you about Tony. Like I've known Tony for 20 years. And those are part of the things that will help you succeed at whatever it is you want, is by nurturing relationships and making contacts and nurturing those contacts. Nobody's just going to like make your career happen, So if you want to be playing shows out in wherever, you need to be going to shows. But go to shows you're interested in, Go to shows, see people that you respect. Surround yourself with people you want to be around or you think you can learn from, That's how you make contacts. And then last, I know I've been saying that find the lesson in every situation and keep pursuing your ideas. I think that's one of the most important things, because it's extremely easy to be negative, right? Why do you think that, well, we could use Twitter as an example. Why do you think that Twitter is so successful as a social media platform, right? Because it's in our nature. It's fun to sit with your buddies and gossip, Twitter is a version of that, but for the world. So that's kind of where I wanted to close. In 2024, the landscape of the arts and creative industries is more dynamic and competitive than ever. And that's absolutely true. So, in a world flooded with content and rapid technological advances, the pressure to conform to trends or chase mainstream appeal can be overwhelming. However, for artists seeking a meaningful, sustainable career, authenticity remains the most powerful tool for standing out, creating impact, and fostering long-term success. Authenticity in art is about being true to your vision, values, and voice. Audiences in 2024 are more discerning than ever. They can sense when an artist's work lacks genuine passion or integrity. As social media and streaming platforms offer access to a vast array of creators, it's the artists who remain honest to their identity and perspective who form deeper connections with their audience. Authenticity breeds trust and loyalty, while also allowing for more impactful work that resonates on a personal and emotional level. Furthermore, in an era where issues like mental health, identity, and inclusivity are at the forefront, artists who embrace their true selves can challenge societal norms, shift perspectives, and inspire others. As an artist, being vulnerable and sharing your unique journey helps break down barriers and encourages others to explore their own creativity. In 2024 and beyond, the courage to be yourself is not only key to artistic fulfillment, but also a necessary ingredient for innovation and lasting influence in an ever-changing world. Ultimately, authenticity is about the freedom to explore, experiment, and evolve without losing your core identity. That's important. It's about saying or staying grounded in what drives you creatively, even when faced with the temptation to follow trends or to chase commercial success. In this context, authenticity isn't just a strategy, it's a way of life that empowers you to build a meaningful artistic career rooted in passion and personal truth.
I feel like something that I struggle with in making artistic decisions that feel authentic is knowing that there are endless possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of find myself getting into a little bit of a like analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with that in your career? Like, what would you have to say to that?
I think that some of that kind of comes to the planning thing, where you want to sit and plan what should happen. Maybe that's not what you're doing, but there does come a point where, and I think it might just come from experience of doing things over and over, of realizing that the more control that you try to have over a thing, the less control you're going to have over it. Right? Now, these scores that I showed you, I don't have a whole lot of control, right? And yeah, maybe there was way cooler things that could have happened, and that didn't happen. But they did organically create what they were going to create, right? A metaphor I like to use a lot is like, because what you're talking about is kind of a form of mental chaos, because there are endless possibilities in what you do, right? It's the water one. So like you're trying to calm like a pond. You can't do that to it. You know what I mean? You just have to like let it be, and eventually it'll calm. You know, the water will calm. You know. So what you really have to do is you have to write a lot of pieces and be like, oh, you know, the last time I did this, I made the wrong decision, and then you just keep doing that, and then eventually you like write pieces with stupid shapes on the damn paper, and no, but I don't know if that helps, but
No, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
you know, trying to allow yourself to be like, you know what, I know I can do more, I know I can keep going on this, but the piece is kind of telling me it's done, or whatever the project is. I'm just going to let it be out in the world. Just let it go out in the world, you know. And then the next time you start a new project, you're going to have all these fresh, refined ideas, and you're going to be like, oh, the last time I wanted to do this, and I didn't get to do it. I'm going to make sure that I do that this time, you know. So it's kind of an ongoing process. Write your ideas down. You know, it's a good one to do.
So, I was wondering, do you have any like advice on, I guess, balancing like the joy of creativity with the career side of things? Because I know like in my instance, like I love just sitting down at Ableton making a song or something.
Yeah, totally.
And then, but it's like there's not really, there may be, but in my experience, there's not like a straightforward pipeline where it's like, oh, you make a song on Ableton, like you can get hired like doing that. You know what I mean? So a lot of the time it's like when I'm looking for work, I'm looking for studios that are looking for engineers and runners and stuff like that. And I know that like I imagine it's kind of similar to working with game companies where they're very like business corporate mindset, but you're coming in with a creative angle. Those don't always mesh super well. Do you have any advice on like bridging the gap between those?
I think that, so let's say that your art practice is sitting in Ableton and making tracks and making pieces. How do you I don't like to use the term monetize, but how do you monetize that time? So maybe you record yourself doing that, and you show how you're mixing and mastering, or not mixing and mastering, but how you're mixing this track, how you're proficient at what you're doing, and you're building a portfolio of stuff, because people want to see a portfolio, and how do you show someone, I'm an engineer, this is my portfolio. You show them tracks, right, or whatnot. You say, oh, here's these videos of me producing tracks live, and they'll be like, oh, wow, this is cool. This is different than what everyone else is showing me. People are just flooding me with tracks, you know. So figuring out the way to get the most out of your practice, you know. I have a lot of hobbies. I'm a student of North Indian classical music for 20 years. I studied tabla with a very famous maestro. And for me, I call it a hobby because in order to do that sort of thing and call yourself not a hobbyist, I don't know, I don't call myself humble, but I think I'm too humble to ever say I'm anything but a hobbyist on that. But the thing about that instrument is that I love to practice and I love to do it, right? So sometimes I'm sitting for a while and I'm practicing and I'll videotape it, but I'll videotape it with a metronome and I'll post it and say, practice this kaida with me at quarter note equals 85. And it becomes something that's useful now, you know?
Contributing to the community.
Yeah, it becomes something that's useful. So I know that's not a perfect example of what you could do, but figuring out a way to squeeze out every useful thing of just what you love to do, you know?
Yeah, I think balancing like the ability to like keep it fun and light, but also, you know, because one of my things, because I've been told like to stream and make content and stuff like that, is like, am I going to be spending all this time now learning how to make good content and stuff like that? You know,
but the thing I've learned about that is that you can make up your own way to make content, and it doesn't have to be like everyone else does. Like, whatever that workflow is, that takes time to find. It's similar to like building a template in a DAW. That takes a long ass time. It does, and depends on the project too. Like I have orchestral templates, I have like EDM templates, I have all kinds of different templates, you know, and they took a long time to make, but they're so incredibly useful because now I can just hop in and do that thing. So maybe your workflow is to always have OBS open, you know, with whatever camera you're using or whatever, your mic always set up, so you can just be like, I want to make some tracks, record. All right, and then you just mess around for 2 hours or whatever. Yeah. Then maybe on the weekend you do some work. But trying to figure out the way to make that workflow as simple as and as accessible as possible is worth the time. Because otherwise you're just, I mean, if you want to be like everyone else on YouTube, not that you shouldn't try to do some of that stuff, you know, but your workflow, your process will make you stand apart because it won't be like everyone else's.
Right.
You know, how many people on YouTube do you see that just do shorts with just like their phone, you know, but whatever, their camera angle is just different or something, and it totally suits what they're doing, and how easy is that, right? Yeah. Just experiment with that, and don't be afraid to put up weird stuff.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. I think that folks are afraid of powerful technology, as they should be. I think that we've made our mistakes with powerful technology. Using Twitter as an example, or actually we could use YouTube as an example. So when YouTube was first created, we have this amazing platform that we can put all kinds of knowledge on and learn all kinds of stuff. But what do? We watch, and I'm not saying it's bad or stupid, we watch cat videos, right? Now, Twitter comes along, and I'm not going to talk about politics or any of that stuff, but we start realizing the dangers of technology when there are things that we didn't think about, like, oh, what if they use YouTube to show you videos that maybe will influence you to do this or to think that, right? The internet does that all the time. That's what social media has become. It has become a logarithmic advertising, right? So I think the important thing is to know that whatever danger it may be, and be the one that sees it and is conscious of it. I don't think that it's going to do anything bad. I think it's going to do something similar to when when the digital camera was invented, everyone was like, so everyone just gets to make film now, you know? But what it did was it created a new genre and new things that could never would have been done on film. Actually, David Lynch says that. I don't know if you know who David Lynch is. But that's kind of my thoughts on it. I think that if you're afraid of something, you should look at it in the face and figure out what it is that you're afraid of it doing. That way that you're conscious of it if it happens. Because you can stop it if it happens. You can use AI, like AI is amazing for generating ideas, but the ideas are only as good as the questions you ask. Right? If I ask YouTube, show me a video, right? Shows me a cat video. Or if I say show me a video that explains the nature of time, there's two things there. You know what I mean? So I think that the future of AI really is the quality of the questions that we ask it, right? Whatever that may be. And I'm no authority to say what a quality question is, right? But you're artists, like, you think of interesting questions, You think of impossible questions. That's what's cool about generative music is because, you can trick the computer to do things it doesn't maybe know how to do, and maybe it glitches and does something cool. Now, it's a dumb example, but that's kind of what I think about it. So